Hello, and welcome to the 2020 Tucson Humanities Festival. My name is Alain-Philippe Durand, and I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities. Thank you for joining us. My esteemed colleagues have prepared these presentations to challenge and inform us, and perhaps help us seek better solutions to the problems we face in the world today. Now, please enjoy this presentation and visit our website, humanitiesfestival.arizona.edu, for the complete event schedule, as well as recordings of this event and future events. The 2020 Tucson Humanities Festival is supported by the Humanities Seminars program. The program offers premier adult education by top university professors from its home here in the College of Humanities.
Purgatorio, viaje al corazón de la frontera, a journey into the heart of the border. Purgatorio is but one of many cinematic treatments of the Mexico-US border. This geographic, social, economic, and cultural space has been the subject of literally thousands of feature-length and documentary US films over the past 100 years. By one estimate, Mexico has produced about 300 border films in the same period. It's important to note that these films have undoubtedly formed part of the fabric and stereotypes and misconceptions that many generations of both Mexican and US citizens have formed of one another. Generations of Americans have grown up by watching films about the US border and the US frontier. These films, known as Westerns, were highly popular in the 1930s forward. They glorify masculine individualism, emblematic and heroic roles of actors such as Gary Cooper and John Wayne. They are symbolic of American white identity, defending settlers against Mexicans and Indians. Mexican men in minor roles were cast generally as villainous, evil, and untrustworthy. Mexican women in even more minor roles were highly sexualized, especially if partnered with Anglo men. Virtuous Anglo settlers fought Indians, Mexican and Mexican-American, and Anglo bandits. And the natural elements as well, with the goal of civilizing and taming the frontier in general and the Mexico-US border in particular. Mexico produced its own versions of low-quality cowboy bandit films, with the border often depicted as a lawless haven where Mexican bandits could escape justice. Beginning in the 1950s and extending from there, several well-known US and Mexican films offer nationalist portrayals of the neighboring government and/or its leaders. US films exemplified American nationalism and the othering of Mexican and Mexican-Americans, as well as Indians. In the same period, Mexican films celebrated Mexican nationalism, warning would-be immigrants of the dangers north of the border, where they would certainly suffer and be exploited and mistreated by ruthless and cruel employers and discriminated against by racially biased Anglos. A high-quality Mexican film with nationalist elements is Espaldas Mojadas, Wetbacks, produced in 1955 and shown extensively on both sides of the border. It warns migrants of illegal crossings without documents. The underlying nationalist message is clear. Stay at home and enjoy the redeeming nature of Mexican life and culture. While most US Western films excluded the stories of exploited Mexican immigrants, there are notable exceptions. For example, Border Incident, 1950, depicts border agents in a positive way while casting Anglo ranchers negatively. Immigrant themes become more prominent in the 1970s and the 1980s. An example is the 1982 film, The Border. Jack Nicholson, who is initially portrayed as a hyper-masculine, insensitive, and racist border patrol agent, undergoes a transformation after he begins to understand the personal conditions of poverty and suffering of Mexican and Mexican Americans. Lone Star, 1996, presents the backdrop of corrupt Anglo law enforcement along the border. The film mixes the iconic good and bad people in a bundle of ethnic and gender identities that defy the usual stereotypes. Like Lone Star, the 2000 film Traffic, starring Michael Douglas and directed by Steven Soderbergh, defies easy stereotyping in its depiction of good and bad people involved in drug trafficking and the drug war enforcement. The new drug czar in Washington, Michael Douglas, comes to realize the futility of official drug enforcement policy and practices. The immigrant film genre in both the US and Mexico expanded at the beginning of the new century, the 21st century. There were a spate of films. The best of them include Same Moon, 2007, Sin Nombre, Without Name, 2009, Dying to Live, A Migrant's Journey, 2005, and Siete Soles, Seven Sons, and La Tragedia de Macario, Macario's Tragedy, 2006. Same Moon is about the all too familiar separation of a boy from his family as he travels north across the several borderlands to find his mother in Los Angeles. Sin Nombre is a filmic narrative about a young man who flees his country threatened by gang violence. Dying to Live documents the horrifying journey that many Mexicans and Central Americans make to the US. Siete Soles follows a group of 15 migrants as they cross the Sonora-Arizona border to traverse some of the most challenging terrain along the 2,000-mile border. Only 7 survive. The others succumb to dehydration and internal conflict. Macario, a Mexican film with English subtitles, traces the fate of a group of 19 immigrants of several nationalities who die tragically, locked in a railroad car, abandoned to bake in the desert sun. Sleep Dealer, 2008, directed by Alex Rivera, represents a departure from the films I have already described, in that it offers a futuristic view of a privatized, transnational corporate control of water in the borderlands, the indefinite closure and militarization of the border itself, and the exploitation of bodies with robotic technology in globalized Tijuana maquiladoras or assembly plants. The means of exploitation is an anti-immigrant's dream, as we are presented with a technology that allows the US to enjoy low-cost Mexican labor without Mexicans ever having to be on US soil. Perhaps Rivera is prescient in imagining a future along the border that is the product of a completely globalized economy indifferent to human suffering. Several recent documentaries and narrative films aimed at US audiences focus on the escalating violence that we associate with the drug war in Mexico, starting in about 2006. Documentaries like Narcocultura, 2013, Cartel Land, 2015, and a fictitious film, Sicario, 2015 as well, aim to reveal the realities of the US-Mexico border to primarily US audiences. Films such as these tend to emphasize the horrific violence perpetrated by the drug cartels. These films traffic in narrative and visual cliches that reaffirm US public perception of the border as an irredeemable site of endemic criminality and violence. The border is presented as a problem, and as a result, all things related to the Mexico-US border can be collapsed into this view. Purgatorio, Journey into the Heart of the Border, the feature-length documentary that you will be viewing, is a stunning example of filmmaking that interrupts the narrative regarding the Mexico-US border. It stands out for providing an expansive, poetic view of the border. Unlike many of the films I have already discussed, Purgatorio has no main protagonist, but is instead populated by a chorus of subjects with widely diverging experiences of the border. These include school children, a drug addict, a forensic specialist, dog catchers, community activists, historical reenactment actors, 2 immigrants who are trying to cross the border, an environmentalist, murdered police officers, and a humanitarian worker. Rodrigo Reyes, the film's director, narrates the film in Spanish. In the opening scene in which the camera pans a border landscape, he asks the viewer to close his or her eyes to contemplate the world before the creation of borders and the ill effects of human progress on the natural world. The film then focuses on the current state of the borderlands and Reyes' own relation to the 2 countries. He has characterized his documentary as, quote, showing beautiful images of terrible moments. I wanted indirectly to capture the spirit of this place. I wanted it to be an emotional experience of this place. I'm not really concerned with keeping up with the facts. I'm concerned with a poetic truth, end quote. The focus of the 2 migrants at the border fence illustrates the title of the film, recalling Dante's narrative poem and the common literary trope of the pilgrim's journey. Dante's vision of purgatory is one in which every single soul is in progress toward salvation. To come to purgatory is to arrive at the threshold of heaven and to arrive there in a state of grace. Reyes' title indicates a vision of the borderlands as a space in limbo that is nonetheless not static, but instead a space of movement and change. It's a place of beauty and, most importantly, a place of redemption. Most recent narrative and documentary films revel in violent images presenting the borderlands that is infernal without beauty and redemption. While Reyes' documentary may be a confounding place with ironies and paradoxes difficult to square, the border is nonetheless a place of spare beauty. The beauty is emphasized in the camera angles, shot compositions, editing, and the score of the film. Unlike the fast cuts in documentaries like Narcocultura, Reyes' film presents fewer images with longer takes, often in wide angle. These long takes allow the viewer to rest on the images from the borderlands and see the beauty in many border sites. Most documentaries contain specific temporal and spatial references. In contrast, this film contains scenes that are undated but seem out of place or time, as for example, the Wild West shootout in the US and the reenactment of the Last Supper in a filled stadium in Mexico City. While these scenes are at first disorienting, they serve the purpose of layering the past onto the present, suggesting that the situation at the border today has been shaped over a much longer history and by longer cultural traditions. Purgatorio does not aim to hide the truth about conflicts at the border, but rather to give layers and nuance to those conflicts while not exploiting the spectacle of violence associated with it. The film focuses on images that convey their meaning in different modes, working poetically, often through visual and narrative analogy. For example, the images following those of the relatively bloodless corpse are the junk heap of used tires, suggesting that humans in this context have become akin to objects and are treated as disposable. This social harm is made analogous in the film to the widespread ecological harm documented in abundant images of garbage, abandoned construction, and pollution. This use of analogy aligns Reyes' embrace with poetic cinema. Reyes was born in Mexico City in 1983. When he was 6, his family moved to California. When his family then moved back to Mexico, Reyes realized, quote, "There was part of me that was solidly American and did not fit back home either," end quote. He remembers that for the first time he considered his own identity as Mexican. His lived experience in the US and Mexico, and especially his intimate familiarity with the border, informed this documentary. Reyes is a self-taught filmmaker. He self-funded Purgatorio, his first film. Given limited resources, the film was shot over a 4-week period, traveling with a crew of 2, a soundman and a cameraman, from Tijuana to Big Bend National Park. He had more than a year to prepare the shoot. I actually imagined my characters and placed them in the script. In addition to Purgatorio, Reyes' other film is Lupe Under the Sun, a dramatic narrative. This year, Reyes has been announced as one of the 35 winners of the 2020 Creative Capital Awards for a new documentary project. He is the recipient of a National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowship and a fellowship from the Guggenheim Foundation. His work has also received the support of the Tribeca Film Institute, the Sundance Institute, and the Mexican Film Institute. It is a widely acclaimed film, having received several jury awards at several film festivals and official selections at several others, both in the US, Mexico, and now Europe. Purgatorio is a provocative and beautiful rendering of the Mexico-US borderlands. I hope you will enjoy it.